Welcome to the Trick Play Podcast. The full podcast is available on both YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to the Trick Play Podcast. I'm Simon Szyszkowski here with Caleb Peterson, and shortly we'll be breaking down all the sports-related news, rumors, and drama that you will want to hear about this week. We talked about the NHL offseason, including our favorites and least favorite signings so far of NFL and NHL free agencies. Too many weeks. Anyway, then we talked about the Paul George signing over for the 76ers and how the Clippers might be a little bit dumb for their whole entire thing that has been their franchise for the last little bit. Then we talked about the whole Aiyuk saga that has been going down in the NFL and where he could be going and whether or not it's smart that he's sort of advertising it to the entire world of, hey, I don't know where I'm going to be next year, but it might be here, it might be here, it might be here. And whether or not that's smart, that whole thing. Make sure to check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and anywhere else you get your podcasts, as we have new content coming out every single week on each and every one of those platforms. Also, if we haven't hit it at this point, I don't know if we have got there. This would be pretty cool if we suddenly hit it. No, we are at 99 subscribers. I'm just gonna say it. As of recording this, 10:41, at least where I am, on Wednesday. This is gonna come out on Saturday. If we have by some miracle not passed 100 on subscribers on YouTube, please help us out. Because we have been pretty much sitting right on the edge of it for a good month now. Because we were on that run of really, really good, strong episodes, view-wise and all that. We had a good run going. Then we just got stuck at 94 for a little bit there. So now we're finally there. We're finally ready to cross into the triple digits, but we haven't hit it yet. So anyway, up first, we have the NHL offseason stuff.
Canada Day has recently passed, but that's not the important thing that happens on July 1st. No. Most important thing that happens on July 1st is NHL free agency. Now, there's lots of deals, lots of players moving spots, players like Steven Stamkos, who've been on one team for a long time, going to be in a new jersey. It'll be weird. But instead of breaking down every single signing one by one, what we're going to do is go over kind of our favorites, our least favorites, and just kind of give our own opinions on what this most recent free agent frenzy was like. So how this is going to work is I'm going to start by tossing it over to Simon. He's going to give me one of his favorites, then I'll give one of mine, and we'll go to one of our least favorites, then back and forth. So Simon, why don't you start us off by giving us one of your favorite signings of this most recent free agent period?
I thought you were gonna go least favorites first. I already had one picked out, but I'll go favorites. Favorites is a lot tougher because I would put all of these. I would put all these about on the same spot on how much I like them. I think. Oh, that's right. I had an honorable mention for favorites. I'll shout out this guy first because not necessarily. I actually don't like his contract for Columbus, but Sean Monahan getting a 5 by 5.5. That good for him, knowing where his career was even 2 years ago. The Flames traded him away with a first round pick to get rid of him because he just was too injured and nobody really knew if he was going to be able to play again, let alone if he did, whether he'd get anywhere close to what he used to be. Signing a 5 by 5.5 is really impressive for him and good for him as well. But not signing him until he's 34 for Columbus is an interesting look. Definitely considering the history, but no, regardless, good for him. I didn't have the heart to put it on my least favorites.
I think that was one where I both thought about putting it on my least favorites and favorites.
That's how I feel.
Where I was man, he's doing a lot better. He's gonna reunite with Gaudreau. That's so smart. They're gonna play. They have great chemistry. And then you just think about it a little bit more and are like, wow, they're paying him that much money. And
for that long.
For how long? Yeah.
In that sense, kind of
brutal. Goes back down.
Yeah. That was my honorable mention.
But it's a good fit.
Yeah, that was my honorable mention.
They overpaid for a good fit. I'll probably start with the
smallest name of the three. That being said, they're all big names. In Brandon Montour signing a 7.1 by 7 with the Seattle Kraken. I had that as one of my favorites. I think that's a great deal for them. They had a couple big moves in this free agency, but I thought that was their best. I think they're bringing in a top line defenseman to really help them out. This is starting to look like the best team they've had since that first year where they were able to make the playoffs. This team's looking really good. They have a lot of youth. Now they're bringing in a lot of guys who have been there, done that. And Montour, it's a long deal, and I don't know how much. I don't actually have his age in front of me, which is something to look up. But isn't he like 30?
I can pull the age. Yeah, he's not young. He is 30.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Cap hit of around $7 million.
Yeah. So it's a long deal for a lot of money, but I don't know if they're necessarily worrying about what'll happen at the end of that deal. You know what you're getting at the start of it, and he deserves that $7 million contract. So, at least to a degree, I think it's a really good deal for them. I think this is a sign that they're going to be looking to contend, as well as the other big moves that they made in free agency, which I'm assuming we'll get to at some point here. But regardless, personally, it was in my top 3. I think it's a really smart move for them.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I think I'm a little bit more torn on it. Just because when I look at NHL free agency, I think the teams that do the worst generally are the ones that are the most reactionary. So I always get I always get a lot of trepidation whenever I see signings from recent Stanley Cup champions, because a lot of the time you've seen them a lot in the playoffs, and then a lot of the time they kind of fizzle out. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen with Montour, because I actually do really like the player, but I do worry about overvaluing necessarily. And $7 million is a huge cap hit, and that is for a long time. What was it, 7 years?
Yeah.
Was it a 7 by 7?
Yeah.
That's a long-term investment for a lot of money. And I just think I didn't like make my least favorites or anything. Like I did consider it for one of my favorites just because I really like the player and I really like the fit. I do think just the terms of the contract scared me away a little bit, because I do think that is a lot of money. I do think he's worth it, especially for that team, because it really beefs up their decor.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just it to me it feels like one that could go either way, because it could either be great fit on great team and you don't care how much you pay for him, or you look at it as an overpay if he kind of falls short even just a little bit. Like, it's never going to be looked at as a steal of a deal is kind of what I'm looking at.
No, I agree with that. I think they got him for pretty much exactly what he deserves. In fact, they might have got him for cheaper than he deserves, considering he is coming off a bit of a down year, just not including the playoffs. But I do see where you're coming from. I think they are giving him a lot of money, and I'm always a little scared whenever I see those 7-year deals handed off to 30-year-olds, which we saw a lot of in this year's free agency, actually.
We did.
And I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot. But I don't know. I like it a lot. I think the team fit makes a lot of sense. I think he was going to get a deal like this pretty much anywhere he went. And I think out of all the teams he could have got it from, I think the Kraken are probably the team that made the most sense at this point.
That's true.
So at least in that sense,
I love the fit.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I was looking at his stats on NHL.com, and they have like all the Kraken stuff around him. It looks right, seeing that logo next to his name. So I like it a lot. I see where you're coming from though. If you want to give one of your favorites, because
Yeah, so I think I'm going to start with probably I'll start with my lesser known name, but honestly one of my strongest opinions. And this kind of goes along, so my general opinion on NHL free agency, I think a lot of moves, even the ones that look good in the moment, most of them don't pan out. A lot of times people will overpay, and a lot of times the big contracts people will give out do spoil over time, which is why I love when teams focus on signing a lot of more smaller pieces or depth guys that when it comes down to it in the playoffs, they're the ones making lots of the contributions. While some of the teams that have put a lot of money into these star players often fizzle out because they don't have enough room for anybody else. And this is a team that I think has had a huge shift in philosophy. Maybe not philosophy is the right word, but just a reinvigorated focus on getting some depth pieces. And this is a signing that, while I mocked it a year ago when they initially signed this player, after watching his performance in the Stanley Cup final, I can say this is an absolute steal for someone who is very key to the Oilers' depth, and that's Connor Brown. I never thought I'd be saying that a year ago.
Wait.
Yes.
I was not ready for that. I don't even have his contract in front of me.
No. So it was
he's not even on my
1 million.
list. What is it?
It's $1 million for a year. It's $1 million for a year, and I think I don't remember exactly what his contract was last year, but this is around the same. And I just think, with how critical he and Janmark were to that penalty kill, which was their strongest unit throughout the playoffs, I just think it's so important. You saw him play his best hockey in the playoffs. I think it shows a great. Obviously, that's great at any time, playing your best games in the biggest games of the season. But I also think it kind of adds to the fact that he was coming off a huge injury, and I think he only got better as he got healthier. And it isn't like, I think what we were worried about last year was the framing of it, where it's like, oh, he's reunited with McDavid, he's going to be McDavid's line mate, and people are being like, oh, this is the signing of the season. Now it's going under the radar, and I think I don't have the contract from last time, but I think it's pretty similar. Because I was scared that someone like him would
probably been less, wouldn't it? I would have thought he would have
gotten less,
minimum.
it's not by much.
Exactly.
If it's less, it's not by much.
No,
you
it would have been
much less than this, which is what I'm impressed with.
Yeah.
Because I thought that someone was going to give him like a big bonus because of how he played in the Cup final.
I don't know. He had 12
I don't know. To me,
in the regular season. Just I know considering the injuries, there's a big asterisk on that. I know that's not the point, but I'm adding on the fact that like we just had this conversation about people basically overpaying for people who play well in the playoffs, right? I think that gets taken away when you only get 12 points, and I think he probably knows that. As much as last year's contract with the Oilers was a prove-it type contract, I'd actually look at this year as a real... This is his chance to prove that he's worth, like, being the type of guy who can get that more than $1 million for a year, right? Multi-year contract in the NHL, and prove that he deserves the money that a player of the caliber we saw in the playoffs would assumingly deserve. But I think it makes sense that he doesn't get that contract yet. I don't think anybody would have given it to him. Because no matter how good you are in the playoffs, if you can only score 12 points in the regular season and 4 goals in your most recent season, you're not going to get anything. Doesn't matter how good you were in the playoffs.
No. You're not. And I think that worked out to the Oilers' benefit. And my point is not to say, like, my point isn't even necessarily about, oh my goodness, Connor Brown, like, best player imaginable. It's not. It's the value that they got for this.
First line center, Connor Brown.
Yeah. And touche to the point about playing well in the playoffs, as I just said, and then kind of went back on. But I do think that's different just because of the injury, and just because it was more of a steady progression over time, less so than just feeling like he's being overvalued because we saw him play most recently. I do think this is a bit of an exception to that rule, and that rule most generally applies to when people are like giving out huge contracts, and this is nowhere near that. And it's a great value piece that I think goes along well with the rest of their signing.
Yeah, I also wanted to add on to that, even like playoffs, 19 games, 6 points. Like even with I know that's not the point you were necessarily trying to make with how important he was defensively, mainly on like the penalty kill and stuff like that, but I don't imagine even like a mainly penalty kill player isn't going to get any type of money doing 6 points. Like he just didn't have that enough offensive output to really warrant, I think, getting a bigger contract. I think this is
No.
his year to prove it. Because I absolutely see where you're coming from. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but I have a hard time. I think the Oilers got him for exactly the same anybody would have gotten him for. I think, if anything, the main reason he's sticking around with the Oilers is this is the team that gave him a chance. Now he's going to get a real chance to see if he can prove that he could do it on a bigger scale, I guess. If he can keep improving, I think he'll get a bigger contract, but yeah. I guess we'll see. It's an interesting contract. Or not an interesting, it's an interesting player is what I mean.
I just think it's one of the more under the radar ones that I think is going to end up being pretty important. I think the fact that they were able to re-sign a lot of guys similar to Connor Brown that really helped them gives me a lot more hope for what they'll be able to do next year. Yeah. Like, that was one of my big question marks. Okay. Anyways, do you want to get to one of your least favorites?
Sure. I think we'll stay in the Pacific. I think I'll go with the one that, and we didn't rank these, like neither the favorites or least favorites, but out of all of my least favorites, this is the one I hate the least. It's again with the Kraken, as we were talking about, with another one of their bigger moves. They brought in Chandler Stevenson on a 6x7, which is oddly pretty similar to what they gave Brandon Montour in a lot of ways. Both players will be there for the next 7 years. But I don't like it because, and there is a pattern of this year with a lot of teams giving, and it's a pattern that isn't unprecedented. Like, we've seen it in the past, but it feels like this year we're seeing it even more than usual with, and this is gonna sound like a big punch in the nuts to Chandler Stevenson, who I think is a bit better than this, but giving role players long-term deals like that, I don't really agree with that. Like, he's a 50-point player, and he's absolutely worth like a $6 million contract. He's great defensively. He can score when you need him to. He's a great playoff player. But a 7-year deal, really, it's a punch in the gut to me a little bit, especially with the center depth that they have coming up. Like, they have so much depth at that position, and I, like, even like 3 or 4 years down the road, I could see a world where he is the third center on that team. Do you really want to be paying your third center $6 million?
Yeah.
That's brutal. Like, he's good, but I don't know if he's not going to get any better. He can only get worse. And it's a tough contract, at least to me. Like, more length than the actual, like, I think in 4 years that's going to be a really bad deal. Right now, it's not bad. They don't have a lot of people they really need to pay urgently. But when they actually do, that contract's going to start to stink a little.
Yep, and I agree. We're actually knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone here, because I also have him as one of my least favorite contracts. This is kind of where the Kraken's moves kind of puzzle me a little bit, and I do, talking again about the more reactionary teams being the ones that kind of scare me a little bit in terms of not making good moves. This does feel very reactionary, just in terms of, trying to follow their expansion big brothers, right? Like, the Kraken 2 years ago had a great season. They go into the playoffs, they beat the Avalanche, and it's like, oh yeah, they're picking up momentum because the Golden Knights set such a high bar for success as an expansion team. And it looked like the Kraken were actually going to do the incredible job of somewhat following it up with how much success they had in the playoffs a couple of years ago. And they just took a huge step back this year. Yeah. And so part of me wonders if they're like scrambling, like, what do we have to do next? Just like, you get in some guys, proven playoff, bring in Brandon Montour, proven playoff performer. Let's get Golden Knights. Bring in Chandler Stevenson. But it just feels like it is, I think, such an overpay for him, like you said. And I think that the term, like you also pointed out, is a huge concern as well, because it was 7 years, and he's 30. It's another one where it's like, are you really giving these 30-year-old players 7-year deals? Like, that contract is going to look so bad when they start aging out of it halfway through the deal, and you have to be paying him this obscene cap number for another, like, 3 years when it already looks like shit. I don't know. And I never thought he was one of the key pieces that made that Golden Knights team hum. I mean, you look at what a guy like Marchessault got in terms of a deal, I felt like he was much more vital to their success, and his cap hit's about $1 million less. I just feel like
Wait,
it's
is it really? I didn't think
stuff
about
being
that.
allocated. Yeah.
Wow. Another point I was going to throw on there,
It just
just to throw it in the mix as well, is the fact that it kind of makes me wonder if they're starting to doubt what they have in Shane Wright as a prospect. Because I think if the Kraken internally are starting to think maybe this guy doesn't have the potential to be a second or like a first or a real center, right? Like a real guy they can rely on in the future, then this contract makes a lot more sense. Because I think, honestly, signing Chandler Stevenson to be your long-term second-line center, I'm okay with that. But, like, if we're talking about Shane Wright as a prospect, when he came into the league, and even now, I'd still consider him as a potential second-line center. Like, I think more now I'm leaning more second than I would have been in the past, saying a first-line center, but I still would think second-line center for Shane Wright. And when you sign that for a third line center, that's just absolutely brutal. So it does make me wonder if this is them giving up a little bit on what they have in their prospect pool. But I don't know. It is an interesting deal. It's definitely a head scratcher because I didn't even think about the fact that they're kind of going after Golden Knights. That's a good point. Because it is odd. Like, the Kraken have a weird team. They've had a weird team since they came into the league. I've been saying that for a while. Like, they're just like the Golden Knights after that first year didn't necessarily feel like misfits anymore. You know what I mean? Despite that being like their whole thing, they didn't feel like misfits anymore. Like the Kraken feel like misfits, and they've been in the league for a few years now. Like they still feel like that, and that is kind of the one thing with me where I look at this team and it's just a bunch of guys who on any other team would be really good, but on this specific combination, it just feels wrong. So, I don't know. That's how I feel about them at this point.
Yeah.
I don't think Chandler Stevenson helps them out too much.
No, I agree. And I do think they're just kind of searching for an identity. Because I don't know how you can't following up the Golden Knights. I don't know how much that actually plays into the decisions they're making. Probably very little. Like, they probably don't actively think about it, but you know that pressure has to be there with how well the Golden Knights have done in the last 5 years.
I bet they do think about it. Because, I mean, it's got to be like a big... I mean, that's... it's almost like a locker room thing at that point where the coach is pointed out, like, look at what they've done in their time here. Do you really want to be the guy who couldn't do that? Right? Like, it's kind of that type of thing, right? Like, I think they absolutely do think about it. Because, I mean... I wouldn't say there's a rivalry there, but there's almost like a spiritual rivalry in a way, right?
Yeah.
I think we should move on.
It is like a sibling rivalry.
Yes,
almost.
that is
Big brother, little brother.
Very good way to put it, actually. But we're 21 minutes into this thing, so we should probably speed up a little bit.
Okay, let's pick it up. Well, it's a good thing we can toss it right back to you for a favorite because we knocked out my least favorite as well. So
okay.
So let's hit another one of your favorites.
Well, my favorites, we go back to the big names. I think because the funny thing is a lot of the big contracts this year I like a lot, and I don't necessarily think they have downsides in a sense. I think where we'll start with the least interesting one, because I think my other one is a bit more interesting. But let's go Sam Reinhart, 8.6 by 8 with the Panthers. I have that as one of my favorites. Not a lot of people... There were some people questioning whether he would be coming back because they didn't know whether Florida would be willing to pay him. Now we obviously know they were. And I think he absolutely deserves that number. He's proven that time and time again at this point. There's a lot of questions about him when he first came into the league. He wasn't really living up to those expectations, and he has completely turned those around. And I think out of a lot of the players in free agency, if he had gone to market, he would have been the player probably getting the most money. So seeing him stick around, I mean, how can you not pay your 57 goal scorer that amount of money, right? Like, he was such a huge part of their Stanley Cup win, and they lost a lot of pieces, but I think making sure they keep Sam Reinhart was a huge win for them, because now you're kind of in a spot of, sure, we lost Montour, we lost, I'm sure there's more, but suddenly off the top of my head I can't even remember.
Tarasenko,
that's a good one too.
Just got signed today.
Yeah, but the fact that you're able to keep Reinhart is just so huge for them. So I have that on as one of my favorites just because of that. Like, that's got to be huge for the Panthers.
Yeah.
I know the whole fan base is pumped about that.
Yeah, and I think this was just like the biggest no-brainer. Like, you win the
Yes.
cup and then you just put that as next on your do list and try to check it off as soon as you can. Like, it was, I don't even know if we need to spend that much time on it, because it really is just kind of a, like, yeah, why wouldn't you do that, right? Like you said, why wouldn't you sign your 57 goal scorer? It really is just kind of it was almost like a reflex signing of a contract, I bet. You offer that and you don't think twice about it.
They handed him a blank check.
Yeah. And I mean, the only thing, like, if I were to nitpick it at all, you always worry about, like, coming off of career years if it was something he can sustain. But I think that's a little bit less of a concern for him at this point in his career. Like,
in 2022, he had an 82-point season. Like,
that's
don't
what I'm
agree with
saying.
that
Like,
one. Yeah.
No, and that's why I say it's a nitpick, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's something you have to think about, but it's not something I'm thinking about for very long, because we haven't seen production to the level of last season, we've seen similar enough level of production to say, like, it's something we think can be sustained. It's not like a peak out of nowhere.
Yes. When I say he wasn't living up to the hype, if we want to look through his career and kind of just look at it a little bit, like, in his first season in the NHL, first not real season, he had 9 games played, 1 point. Not necessarily looking too pretty. Everybody's freaking out. The next season, 42 points, 23 goals, which, not bad for a sophomore. That was technically his rookie year. Pretty good for a rookie season. And then we look at, after that, he had his first and only ever below 20 goal season in his sophomore season after that one. And then for the rest of his career, he was averaging 20 goals or higher. It was mainly in this assist category where he was kind of lacking. He mostly sat around 50, 60 points up until he joined Florida in 2021, where he put up 82 points. And then since then, in all 3 of his seasons with Florida, he's had 30 goals. So it's 30 goals or higher. Obviously, last season getting 57. But I think $8 million feels cheap for a guy like that, honestly. Like, it's just such
with some of these other contracts going around.
Yeah. Like, that feels like a really good deal for a guy like him. And I don't know how long they have Barkov locked down for here, but they've got that core for the next little bit, because I know he's not. I don't think he's coming up.
No, I would be surprised if
not
he
even
was.
He's still 3 years down the road. So I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're gonna have the majority of their core, or like elite core, locked down for the next little bit, which is huge for them.
Yeah. I can move on and give one of my favorites, and we've kind of already we already brought up this player briefly, but I think my next two favorites, one of them is more for a team fit, one of them is more for contract value, and I think this one is my contract value pick, and that is Jonathan Marchessault. Because especially I think the best thing you can do for this deal is just compare it to the Chandler Stevenson deal.
Yes.
Just because I think he was so much more of an impactful player for this Golden Knights team, and a lot more of their success I felt like was created by him. I mean, he was an original Golden Knight, and had been one of the best players on that team, one of the better teams in the NHL for pretty much his entire tenure there. It's been consistent, sustained success. It's a guy I am more comfortable giving a long-term deal out to, and at a cap hit of only $5.5 million, I'm not like sweating too much about that. Where I'm saying, like, that's a pretty good value for that kind of player, especially considering what some other players are getting that I would value less than him. I think with the fit, I think the Predators offseason has been kind of interesting. I don't know if we'll get to Stamkos, maybe not. But I just think it's interesting to see the kind of moves they've made. They're really pushing, like they're thinking they're a contender, which I don't know if I would have necessarily pegged them as one before, like, the last few weeks of the season when I kind of caught fire.
Yeah.
They had a good showing in the playoffs. I don't know. The team fit, I'm kind of like, I don't know. I feel like you're jumping on the pushing for a Stanley Cup a little bit too early, and I feel like they're more kind of a team in the middle. So team fit isn't necessarily my favorite, but in terms of a pure value deal, if I'm a GM looking like what's the best player I can get for this amount of money, I think Jonathan Marchessault is definitely up there.
What was the number again? I'm looking at his stats right now. I don't have it in front of me. Wasn't it 5 by
27.5 for 5 years, which comes out to 5.5 million per year.
Yeah. Okay, that's about what I thought. I think he's very deserving of that. It's for 5 seasons. That's a little gross. Till he's 38.
Yeah, it is a bit of a long contract.
I mean they're going to be paying Stamkos for just as long, I guess, or not just as long. How long Stamkos?
Yeah.
4 years. Like they're going to be, both of them are going to be around until they're, not necessarily in contention.
These will be their last contract.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yes, definitely for Jonathan Marchessault. But I like it. I like it a lot. The amount of money makes a lot of sense. That 5 years feels very long. Like if you would have asked me how much I thought, or how long of a contract I would have thought Marchessault would be getting, I would have thought 4 years at the max. 3 years would have made a lot of sense. 5 feels like a bit much. Like, because sure, that 5.5 price tag is nice now, but I don't think it'll be that pretty, like, even 3 years down the road. Like, for the last 2 years of that contract, it's probably going to be ugly. I love Marchessault as a player. I think the fit, you say you don't like the fit. I think him on a top line next to Stamkos is a ton of fun. So, at least in that sense,
yeah.
I think it'll be pretty cool to see. I like the Preds are trying to beef up a little bit, especially after... I was thinking when they signed Saros that it kind of almost didn't make sense if they were going to try and, It seemed like they seemed like the team that was going to be treading water a little bit, and this is clearly a sign that that's not what they plan to do. So...
Yeah,
I don't know. I still think they're not really a team that goes past the first round, but I guess we'll see. They're a team that could surprise people, I'd say.
Yeah.
I would not... He is not on my
so,
least favorites. I don't have him on my favorites, though, either. I think he's kind of... I like the contract. I like the contract for both of them, but it's...
I understand your point about it being a bit long, because I think he is, like... I think he
did
is
just have a 40 goal.
Think.
He's a 40 goal scorer in his last season, so it's
that's what I think, though. It's because I just think he's been such a consistent player that there's probably going to be a drop off towards the end of that contract just because of age. But if there's any player, like I think I said this before, if there's any player that I'd invest in long term, is a guy who's shown how consistent he can be over time.
True.
That aging curve is going to happen. Like, it's going to look a little bit worse in the last year of that deal. But I don't think for a player like Marchessault that's going to be as dramatic as some other players around the same age.
Yeah. Okay, are we going to least favorites? Is
that least favorite?
Is it mine? Are we doing mine or yours?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I just did Chandler Stevenson. Okay. So my next two, I think... No, that's a lie. One of these I think is actually worse than the other. But I'll go with this one first. I have Jake DeBrusk to the Canucks. 5.5 for 7 years. I hated that contract the second I saw it. That contract made me go, like, do I think Jake DeBrusk isn't as good as he actually is? Like, it actually made me stop and, like, look up his page on NHL and go, like, what are his averages? Like, because I've always looked at him as, like, a second or third line player. And that's no offense to DeBrusk. But I've always looked at him like that. This last year, he had 40 points on a pretty good Boston team. And you're paying him 5.5 for 7 years. That is ridiculous. Like, sure, he probably deserved, like, it's not even the money. It's not about the money, Spider-Man. But it's paying him that much till he's 34 is just, I don't know. There's so much I just hate about it, especially with how many good players the Canucks have. The players they let go to be able to give him this contract. It seems like it's a crazy amount for me. It might just be me, but I don't like it at all.
No, it's not just you. I'm with you on that. I do think the term is kind of crazy. I do think, yeah, it's a lot of projection that's happening. I think with Vancouver, you're almost just kind of like figuring out a way to tape back together the magic of last season. They're just like, oh, like he'll be good eventually, and you're just kind of like throwing pieces at it and hoping it works. I agree. I didn't have this on my least favorite,
When's
but it isn't
eventually coming? The
necessarily
dude's
because I don't
27.
agree. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I didn't have this on my least, but it's honestly just like a. It's not because I disagree. It's not because I disagree. If I had a fourth slot, I'd probably
Yeah.
slide him in there. Like that's one that's pretty bad. I don't necessarily know if I have a lot to add. It's just a lot to pay for a player that hasn't shown a lot, and it's a lot of projection to do. It just feels like they probably in their scouting were a lot higher on him and just like see a lot of potential in him or something, because like otherwise it's not all there.
They got to be seeing something that we don't. Like, that is a crazy contract to give out if you don't. And I mean, it's not like the Canucks are not sort of known to do this at this point. Like, I think the Ekman-Larsson contract not that long ago, where they gave him like a bonkers amount over a bonkers amount of years, and he lived up to that. Not at all. Like, it's that type of stuff that just kind of leaves you a little bit puzzled. And the Canucks are. It's unfortunate because of the season we just saw them have. It looked like they were heading in a new direction, and this kind of makes me feel like this contract as a whole just feels like a step back in a way. But like, I have a lot of the same issues I have with this signing that I do with the Stevenson signing in a weird way. But honestly, I think I like the Stevenson signing more than I like the DeBrusk signing. Funnily enough, like it's just that type of thing. So, I mean, I'll hand it over to you if you want to give one of your least favorites, so we can try and keep this under an hour.
So, yeah. Speaking of the Canucks, my next two least favorites. I kind of cheated and put two signings in there for both of my next two, but it's because I think they're both kind of similar.
Yeah.
My next two is two former Canucks going to the Bruins, also two former Flames, and Elias Lindholm. And
so we're going to be taking off both of my least favorites here, because I have Elias Lindholm as my other one. So.
Wow, there we go. Okay, so we will speed up the segment a little bit.
A little bit.
It's just to kind of give my reasoning on both. It really does feel like, I don't know, you're just kind of picking the Canucks' remains at this point, because they were so good last year. And it just feels like the Bruins missed the point with this whole thing. I do think, I don't hate the fit. I think I could see, like, Zadorov especially, I could see doing really well in Boston.
Really?
Like, I think
I don't
his
like
style
that
of play will thrive there.
I don't
like I hate the contract. I hate the contract, but I don't hate the fit. Like, I think it's fine.
We've seen that Big Z's work in Boston. This has been well established.
Yeah. Although I don't know if you saw him come out and say, like,
I
don't
did
you
see
dare
that. That's
call
why I
me
made the joke.
Big Z anymore. I thought that was funny.
Very classic.
Yeah.
Very classic. As he should.
Yeah.
Like, that
As
nickname dies in Vancouver.
Yes. Yeah, he's already fitting in well with that comment. But I just think the money is kind of insane, paying him $5 million a year for 6 years. And same thing with Lindholm. Well, I think Lindholm is a lot better of a player and deserves more money. I think paying him close to $8 million a year is insane, and doing that for 7 years is also insane. Just because I think both of these guys were never the most fundamental piece to their team's success. Not in Calgary, not in Vancouver.
I was going to say that.
Like, Lindholm was extremely underperforming in Vancouver for the first couple of weeks. And I think everybody in Calgary kind of was like, yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because he was always better playing with the star player. Like, when he played with Gaudreau and Monahan is when he thrived the best. Like, he thrives when he has other, like, superstar players to bounce off of. And who knows, maybe, like, you put him on a line with Pasternak and he'll have that same kind of spark. But you are paying him like he is a Pasternak at this point.
Yes.
And I don't think he deserves that at all. And it's a very similar thing with Zadorov, where I just think he was not he's never the reason why his teams do good. He provides a spark, excellent personality, like, he'll get your team going, but he's not like, you don't pay Zadorov to be like a top line defenseman, but they're paying Zadorov to be like a top line defenseman.
Yeah.
Neither of those signings make a lot of sense to me. I put them together just because it does feel like the Bruins kind of missed the point on both of those players. They're paying them like they're number one options when they are really just excellent complementary pieces. And I don't think they've ever really been more than that in either of their careers.
I will add on. I think that there is a way the Lindholm contract could end up looking very good. And it completely depends on how well he plays on a line with Pasternak. Because while I completely agree with you, I think Lindholm is elevated by the talent around him. I think we've seen that. That's the biggest lesson we've learned in the last 2 years, is he is not somebody who succeeds by himself very well. If you put him around the right players, he can absolutely be a stud for you. That is what we learned when he was on that line with, it was Gaudreau and, God, now I don't even remember who it's been so long. Who was right wing with that? Who was it again? Tkachuk? No.
Was it Tkachuk?
Whatever. It was whatever line it was that was really, really good for Calgary for a good while there. Like, when he's around the right talent, it works. We've learned that. And it can. Like, I think that if he can return to being an 80-point scorer in Boston, this contract looks really good. Like, on a line next to Pasternak, this contract could look really good. But could they get somebody... Is he as good as the average $7 million player? No, not at all. And he won't be in 7 years either. Like, it's that type of thing, absolutely. So I do agree with you. Zadorov, I would put him probably as my fourth least favorite. I don't like that deal. I like Zadorov as a player. I think that the fit makes a ton of sense. I made the joke about, we already know that a big Z works in Boston, but it's like Boston's a very physical defensive team in a sense like that. Like, it's why they're good. It's why they're consistent. And I think he's like a perfect second line defenseman for them. Do you want to be paying your second line defenseman that much for that long? No, not realistically, but maybe they're hoping he can elevate his play a little bit to being that first line guy. Who knows? It might be a little hopeful, but do you want to move over to favorites? How many do you have left here?
Sure.
Because I just have my favorite.
I have one favorite and one least favorite.
Okay. So, I'll do my favorite first then, if we want to do that. And then we'll throw it up, and then you can end the show off. But Jake Gensel is my last one, signing with the Lightning.
Okay.
I love this deal. I think a lot of people were really mad at the Lightning, and rightly so, for just pretty much dumping Steven Stamkos and signing Gensel. It's absolutely like a bit of a ruthless business move. Like, it's not something that necessarily makes you feel good in the chest, seeing Steven Stamkos basically get replaced with a younger guy. Did the Lightning just extend their like I don't even know what the word is, their
championship window?
Yeah. They probably just extended it 3 years with this deal. And I personally think it makes a ton of sense. What they had for the longest time that made their championship winning team so good was the insane center line duo. I mean, Kucherov obviously, but like having Braden Point and Stamkos down the middle, like on their top two lines, was so lethal because both of them could have been a top line center on any playoff team in their own right. And now we're seeing them actually get the chance to build a proper first line of Point, Gensel, and Kucherov. Are you kidding me? That is insane. Like, that is an insanely stacked first line. Like, that team's going to be so fun to watch next year. They got a lot younger. You can make the argument they got better defensively. Gensel is definitely better back there than Stamkos ever was. Are they losing that, like, finesse scoring touch that Stamkos had? Sure, but that wasn't going to stick around for more than a year or two. Then it was already going, right? Stamkos was already on the decline. So personally, I think this Gensel contract for the Lightning was probably the best deal. That wasn't a re-sign. I would tie it with Reinhardt on like overall value, like going to a team. But out of all the new signings, I love it. I think this contract makes a ton of sense for them. I think they had to give up a 3rd round pick to like make it work for some reason. I don't even remember why.
Well, It was basically because the Hurricanes essentially traded him to the Lightning a day before free agency started,
Right.
just so that Tampa could get a head start on negotiations. Same thing happened with Tanev, um, who we may or may not get to later. Um, but yeah, I completely agree with you. I think I don't.
Oh.
I don't know if I almost just like feel like it's a little like obvious at this point. I tried to go a little bit more hipster. But it
Yes.
was, but this free agency, like I feel
I'm
like
actually happy you did that because now I feel like we had 6 completely different players, so it worked out well.
yeah. But this free agency, like I don't disagree with anything you said. Like I do think this free agency was to a certain extent the Jake Gensel sweepstakes. Like he was the best player on the market that was available. Like maybe you say Reinhardt, but like I don't think there was ever any doubt he wasn't going to stay with Florida.
Yeah. There was a doubt at
At
some
least
point. After they won the cup, I think that doubt went away a little bit, but earlier in the year there was a little bit.
fair enough. Fair enough, but for recent years, like or not years, recent months,
Recent years.
that hasn't necessarily been the case. Recent years,
Yeah.
yeah, we've known for years that he was going to stay with the Panther. But
We knew when
anyways,
he
I
was
can
on the
move on to
Sabres that
my
he was going to be a Panther.
yeah,
Right from the start.
we
Panther
did
for life.
right in our hearts. Um, I can move on to my next pick, and I will immediately give the caveat that I do think this is a little bit of an overpay, but I do like the fit to the point where I'm willing to just turn a little bit of a blind eye to it, and that's Teuvo Teravainen into the Blackhawks. And I just
What
really
was his
like this
contract?
kind of move. So it was the cap hit is a little bit like, oh, I'm gonna close my eyes a little bit. So he's getting paid so 16.2 million for 3 years, $5.4 million cap hit, um, which is a little rich
Yeah.
for my taste. Like I don't necessarily love that, but everything else I love about this deal. I just think it's such a good like support signing because when I look at the Blackhawks, and I think we talked about this in a segment not that long ago in terms of what the Blackhawks needed to do. And it's just to surround their young. It was during the draft segment. They've got the young talent. They got Bedard. They brought in. I can't pronounce the guy's name. I'm so sorry. The defenseman they just took, Lavashnikov.
Art Yom.
Um,
Oh shit! I don't. Without it in front of me, I can't either. It's
I know. I can see it.
Oh shit! I'm gonna.
I think it's like, yeah. But I'm so sorry. But anyways,
It's okay. If we both
um,
can't pronounce
the,
Lev Shinov.
yeah,
Lev Shinov.
Levshinov.
There we go.
Um, so with Bedard, Levshinov, they've got other young talent there. I think they're going to continue to build out that young talent, but this is kind of the next step you take, where you sign one of these guys that can just be a solid top six guy for you, where you just kind of plug him in and you don't worry about it. Like he's not going to be a star, but he's going to provide some excellent support. Like if you pair it, like I don't even know if he'll pair up with Bedard on the first line, but if he does, he'll do really good at it. I just think it's one of these signings that you look at and you just like it just feels right in terms of a team building move. Even if it is a little bit of an overpay, I just think the foundation is there and the process is there for the Blackhawks to say, yeah, like this is how we want to build our team. We're gonna have to pay a little bit to get there, but we're building our team and we're putting this in process and we're not gonna flounder. We're taking steps towards succeeding. That isn't like I love it because it just feels like so much of a it's the perfect middle ground because I feel like a lot of teams once they get young players and start seeing promise, they're just like, oh my god, sign big names, Steven Stamkos, throw him $8 million.
Well, that was
Like
the funny thing.
I'm just
Because that's what a lot of people wanted Chicago to do. Like we heard Stamkos, we heard Gensel, we heard Marner at one point. Like there was names all over the damn place.
yeah, and I
So-
just think that that kind of stunts your growth because it's not natural growth. Signing a guy like Teravainen feels like it incentivizes this natural growth of a team, and that's what I love about it, even if it is, in my opinion, a little bit of an overpay.
I would have been a lot madder if they signed him for longer. Like I think anything over the amount of years,
Yes, that helps too.
anything over the amount of years that they gave in 3 years would have been an overpay. I think a team in their position paying Teravainen for 5.5 for 3 years, right? Wasn't that the 5.4 maybe? Whatever, it doesn't matter. But
5.4.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I think you almost have to overpay a few guys when you're in Chicago's boots because you can't go under the limit. That is the one rule, right? So I think it's actually a pretty smart move on their part. They don't have to pay Bedard for a while, so that's the big one, right? Because when Bedard's contract comes up, he'll be getting money. But as for this, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think them paying for a guy who can. I mean, and then again, he is not known to do this. This was his most ever, I believe. Yes, it was his most goals ever. So it was a career year, in a way. He had 25 goals last year. Only 53 points. So in that sense, not the guy I want to be paying 5.5 if I'm a contender. Exactly. Chicago is not a contender. Yeah. So I do agree with a lot of your points. I think it makes a lot of sense. You're bringing back a team guy. He was on Chicago during their cup runs as well, so we can sit in front of like a campfire in the locker room and talk about the stories of old. So you get that as well.
I don't know if Chicago necessarily wants to talk about the stories of old.
That's a very good point as well. You gotta hope that Teravainen doesn't have many stories of old, but like.
So Teravainen, let's hope was off doing other things.
Yeah.
Anyways, I guess you don't have a least favorite anymore.
I don't. My least favorite was Lindholm. I can probably come up with another one if we really want to try and like.
Do you want to pull one out of your ass?
I'm quickly scanning. Oh yeah. Oh fuck! Wait, no. Least favorites is way harder.
It is.
It is a lot harder.
You
go first. You go first, and then I'll see if I can come up with like something.
Okay. If you've got one, we can end with that then.
Sure.
But my least favorite, one of my last least favorite, it's one where I don't know, man. Brad Tree Living. I don't know what's going on over there. Yeah. It's just like. So we've got. Chris Tanev is one of them, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson is another. It's another package deal one, because I do think it's another very similar thing, where it's just like, why are you giving a 34-year-old defenseman a 6-year contract? It just make a lot of sense to me. Oliver Ekman-Larsson is 32, and they paid him for 4 years, so it's a little bit better, but I think Ekman-Larsson is of significantly less talent, and I think it also kind of speaks to he just won the cup, let's get him. That kind of philosophy that scares me a lot. I don't know. It's just like, if I'm the Leafs, I feel like there's so many other moves that I could have done with this combined. Like, how much is that? I can't math. With this combined $8 million, I feel like you could have done a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think if I'm to play devil's advocate in my own head, I can say like the last few years of the deal don't matter anyways because the Leafs window is already going to be closed at that point. But it just feels like bad process to essentially say like,
but
we're going to burn out the last 3 years of these deals because we just needed to work this year. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how many years either of them have left.
Yes. I will add on the fact that I like the Oliver Ekman-Larsson contract significantly less, actually. Because I think since
I like them both equally.
And it hurts.
I think the Tanev deal is good right now, but it's going to be bad in like 2 years, and then you've got 4 years left.
I hate that Oliver Ekman-Larsson fell off so hard. Only the homies remember 2016 20-goal scorer Oliver Ekman-Larsson. That dude was fun to watch. He had a cannon from... What happened to the shot, man? I don't know if he still has the shot, but he sure as shit doesn't know how to use it. Like, it's sad. It's sad that he fell off this hard. If we can see the Oliver Ekman-Larsson of old on Toronto, that might be the one situation I might be happy with them having a little bit of success. I actually sort of like the Tanev deal. I think 3.5 for a defenseman like him feels so cheap.
4.5.
Was it 4.5? I don't even care. He deserves more than that, in my opinion. Like, not even necessarily for what he personally does, but he and we got to see this firsthand with the Flames for so many years. He elevates whoever he is playing with to a different level defensively. Like, it doesn't matter. You could throw me on right D and somehow it would work. Like, he is so good defensively. And obviously there's worries. Like, there's a lot of worries, especially with the Flames. There was always the jokes going around last season before we traded him of, quick, trade him before he injures himself. Like, as shitty as it sounds, there were a lot of people saying that because he does have a tendency to slide face first into pucks sometimes. So it's a bit worrying to hand a guy like that a 7-year deal, I will say. But in a lot of ways, I like it because of exactly what you said. Their window will already be closing. 4.5 for a guy who adds so much to your defensive. Like, he instantly turns around my thoughts personally of that defense in Toronto. Like, sure, I think Oliver Ekman, if we're packaging them together, Oliver Ekman-Larsson is the only reason that really decreases, like, that entire deal. Will both of those deals look terrible 4 years down the road from now? Absolutely. But
I don't even know if it's 4 years. It's going to be like 2. Like, you just brought up the fact that
Tanev doesn't need to skate to dive face first in the pucks. He can be 55. It don't matter.
Tanev is already 34.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying in terms of this is not a knock on Tanev the player. Let me get that straight. I think adding Tanev to this Leafs decor is actually a move I really like. And I do think it improves my opinion of their core immediately as well. It's just like the philosophy around this move is just something I hate. Because it's like, oh boy, we're going to be in a grave in 2 years. Let's just dig it deeper because we can. Like, it's like, what the hell is that? Just because you're going to be screwed in 2 years doesn't mean you want to make it worse. Because I do think 4.5 is very cheap for a guy like Tanev. Oh boy, I wonder why they got him so cheap. It's probably because they were like, hey, listen, buddy, we could pay you $6 million a year, or we could give you retirement money for an extra 2 years. What do you think about that? And he's like, you know what? Sure, yeah. Like, give me that money. I'll take it. I'll sit on the bench and be like Mark Giordano, just like still hanging around in my 40s but not playing at all.
The difference was Giordano wasn't on 4.5.
Yeah, exactly. I just think this is gonna, like, we talk about lots of these contracts aging poorly. I think there's like maybe 1 or 2 good seasons in there, and then the rest of the deal is gonna age like a milk. If 2/3 of the deal we're already saying, oh yeah, well that's gonna be the bad part, then the whole deal is the bad part. If more than half of it is the bad part, the whole deal is the bad part.
We had this conversation before. I don't know. The whole thing of like, when a guy shows you that he can be consistent, Tanev is the model of consistency. That man has been diving face first into pucks since he came out the womb. And he will continue to do so for as long as he needs to. And I have full faith that will be the case. But, yeah. No, that would be my opinion on that.
All right. Were you able to come up with a least favorite, or?
Yeah, I have one. I think
throw out one.
Yeah, I'll throw out one. Why the hell are the Leafs paying Max Domi for that long? What did he do to deserve a four-year, $15 million deal? It's cheap. It's sure, but I don't know. You could have gotten better for that money. Like, the dude had 9 goals last year. Sure, 38 assists, but it's like, you could get better. Like, I understand you're bringing him in to be like, he had 118 penalty minutes, which is like that's the big thing in a lot of ways. Like, you're bringing him in to be that power forward presence, and Treliving loves his power forward presences. But come on, Treliving, Max Domi's 5'10". You can do better than that, buddy. Why do you want a 5'10" guy on the team? Like, we can Treliving. If you're gonna be signing a power forward, let's get in the mind of Treliving right now. You gotta go at least 6'6" defenseman or something like that. That's where you could have brought Derek Englund out of retirement, Treliving, with that kind of money. You could have done a lot of things. So yeah, that's my other one. Yeah. I don't hate that anywhere as much as the other ones I have on my list, but like, I'll throw that one out there as well.
No, that's fair. I don't know. I just can't hate a contract that's that cheap that much. I don't know. It's like, yeah, it's too long. It's too long, and they could have most certainly used that money elsewhere. But
It's
it's
too
like
long for a
it's
guy
not.
that hardly is worth that much.
No,
Hardly.
yeah, I agree. I agree. It's not going to be my favorite signing either. I might have a soft spot for him in like because in my NHL 14 franchise, I
Oh yeah.
got him and he developed into like a 90 overall, and
Oh
like
yeah.
it's my like 150 points in a season.
If we're gonna
Maybe
do
that's what
that
they're
though,
hoping for. Maybe
my
Brad Freeliving hacked my NHL
it's
14
true.
account and was like,
Yeah.
"Hey, this Max Domi kid's pretty good."
Yeah. Well, just like that, I was obviously the one to find Connor McDavid in NHL 15. Yeah, where he had a
Mm.
significantly better career with my Calgary Flames, and then he was drafted to Edmonton, and I deleted the save file. Shred all, shred the
We all
evidence.
have dreams. Hey, maybe McDavid's contract is coming up soon, right? We
Oh
talked
yeah,
about
you
it
think he's
before.
coming to
Maybe
Calgary?
your dreams will come true. Maybe
Well,
your dreams will
no.
come true,
Oh,
Simon.
here's my rant coming like how many 9 years too late. I still remember this. I'm still mad about this to this day. In that franchise, I made it to 2019. I had brought to the Flames. I had brought Ben Bishop, the prime Ben Bishop, Connor McDavid. I had a stacked team. Like there were stars everywhere, and then the Flames didn't fucking renew my GM contract, and I had to go to Chicago. I was so pissed. I that is the
Uh,
only time that has happened to me in one of those games. I don't even remember why. I was so mad. So yeah, there you go. I also won a cup for them. I was like, thanks guys. No, yeah, it was great. There we go. That's my final the memories of
there
NHL
you go.
14.
That's a good way to end it. You're a better GM than everybody else in the league,
Absolutely.
and
That
people
was
don't give you the
not
credit.
that's not something we needed to think about. Like, you should see my NHL save file right now that I've been playing. Got like fucking Gavin McKenna. What was my top line again? Gavin McKenna, an overpaid Goudreau, and fucking who's my right wing? Oh, Coronado, who I developed. That's my top line. To anybody out of Calgary, that sounds really bad. But like, imagine 4 years down the road when Goudreau's like literally walking with crutches because he's like 36. It's gonna be great. Moving over to the NBA, we're going to talk about the Paul George contract that recently was given to him by the 76ers of $212 million over 4 years. In what is, without a doubt, them pretty much putting it all on the line to see if they can try and contend here. For the last little bit, they've been a very good regular season team. We saw Joel Embiid win an MVP, but they haven't really shown that yet in the playoffs, and we've still kind of just been waiting for it. This is them trying to really make a run at it. And while honestly, the last decade almost, Paul George hasn't necessarily been known for being that playoff guy, specifically with the Clippers, and even with back in his days with the Thunder, he didn't necessarily have that much success. But regardless, this is them trying to put something together. And now, more than ever, I think this might be the best 76ers team on paper we have seen in a very long time, with them now having a big three of Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey. So, without a doubt, it's going to be an improvement on paper. I say on paper a lot because the one thing that we have seen is whenever teams try and make these big threes, sometimes it does not work at all as intended. And that could obviously be the case with this one. So, I don't know. At least to me, I look at it a little bit with a grain of salt at this point. But on paper, Caleb, as I know you won't have the numbers for this to necessarily help you out, so I feel like I'm throwing you in the deep end. But how much do you like this team now going into the East next year? Obviously, they've gotten a lot better. This is gonna help them out a lot. I think they're bringing on a guy who scored 20 points per game, bringing Drummond back, a guy who can rebound a lot. How much do you like them in a pretty strong East? I'd say this upcoming year.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I do think you set it up pretty well in terms of where the Sixers have been at the last few years, because I mean, it really did feel like their whole because I mean, it's been like an almost decade long journey for them. going through the process, and that really brought them more than anything. Just Embiid was the prize of all of that, and I think other than injury struggles, has transcended pretty much all expectations. Um, so it's from then on, when you get Embiid, the process kind of ends, and then you go into this period where they've just struggled to make it far in the playoffs. You have moments like the Kawhi shot in Game 7 against the Raptors. Like, I feel like that's almost the closest they've gotten. You've seen stars come and go around Embiid, and they just haven't really been able to put anything together. Like, even like, was it even that long ago that we saw James Harden on the Sixers?
No,
And
it
we're
wasn't.
saying like, oh yeah, and we're saying like, oh yeah, this is going to be the time where the Sixers make. I feel like there's a um, conversation like this every year where it's like, does blank star finally put the Sixers over the top? I do think there's a couple things that go in their benefit. I do think the development of Tyrese Maxey as kind of like a supplement to Embiid, to say like he's not doesn't have to be the only homegrown star on this team. It's not just Embiid and a supporting cast of insert disgruntled star who
It's
doesn't
no
want to play
longer
for their
just
former
Ben
team, so they go sign a
Simmons,
contract.
Embiid and Ben Simmons.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I don't know. I do think that goes in their favor. Um, but it is very much a wait and see thing in terms of how Paul George will fit into this team. Because Willie has been very consistent. Like, he's had a very consistent career. He continued to put up good numbers with the Clippers, even if that team didn't necessarily pan out the way we thought it would, which is something we can get to later. But obviously has not been a very consistent presence on the court. If you look at the games he's played, whether it be to injury or whether it be to just rest, he isn't always on the court every night. And when you're paying him that much money, you kind of want him to be. And then obviously age is another thing. I believe he's 34 at time of signing. We talked a lot about contracts going to very much older players in our NHL video, and well, I think basketball is slightly different. Giving a 34-year-old a 4-year contract still isn't anything to just kind of say, oh, it'll be fine at.
I wouldn't
I think
say
that's kind of
it's not different enough to warrant that. I think
no,
Paul
it's
George has
not.
a style where I think it'll translate to, even when he's 38, he's still going to be like at least a 15-point scorer. But I don't know. It is kind of an odd deal, I guess, in that sense. You are absolutely right. He feels like the type of guy who I would have given a 2-year, maybe a 3-year, but I don't know if he would have taken a 2 or 3-year to throw that out as well. I have a funny feeling they gave him that term to kind of get him through the door, in a sense. I don't know if they're necessarily thinking that long down the line. They're thinking, we want to give our guy who's been here for close to a decade at this point in Embiid, we want to give him a championship. And Tyrese Maxey as well, is, even if he is the rising star of the duo and hasn't been on the team for as long, they want to take advantage of the time they get before having to, or no, they just extended him, so never mind. I'll shut up. But it's before having to really give him that type of like monster deal to get him to stay on the team. So it's, I don't know. I don't hate it. I think there are other options than bringing in a guy like Paul George. I honestly think I like the idea of giving that money to a bunch of role players. I think we've kind of seen that works a lot better. But, of all the big threes we have seen in recent time, it's pretty good. Like, it seems like one that would work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest thing in terms of these big free agent signings in the NBA and whether they work or not is, are you signing because this star player fits with your team, fits what you're trying to do, and you're just trying to add that star power to an already existing philosophy and how you're going to build your team, or are you just collecting names? And I mean, we've seen this time and time again, most recently with the Suns, where it really did feel like they were just collecting names at the end there. Adding Bradley Beal, where it just like the philosophy did not mesh, where you have a whole bunch of scorers and not a lot of anything to back that up. you've got to kind of hope that I think that that's the tipping point in terms of a lot of these signings are going to be the tipping point here. Does Paul George fit with what the Sixers already have on their roster? Does he complement them, or is it just a name to win the offseason or something like that?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think of that? Do you think he fits well with what they already have? Does he complement Embiid, Maxey, that pre-existing roster well enough at least, in your
Um.
opinion?
Yeah. I think my issue with a lot of big threes is that they try and basically make it with a bunch of players who all want to do the same thing. Like a lot of big threes fail because there are three players who all want to carry the ball up the floor, and they all can't. There's only one ball. I think that won't be the case with this because obviously Joel Embiid is the center. I think he's okay. He's gonna get his touches to get himself to 30 points every season, regardless. I think Tyrese Maxey is the obvious like ball carrier out of the three. I think Paul George at this point in his career, I would be surprised if he was not okay with the idea of kind of just becoming that type of like a what's the word I kind of the catch and shooter almost in a sense where he gets the ball in his ISO situations, he gets them in that. Maybe he's not putting up 22 points a game like we're sort of used to him putting up at this point, but I still think I think it'll work. I think out of all of the big threes we've seen, this one makes probably one of the most sense. But we have seen in recent years that as a whole it just sort of doesn't work like as a philosophy as much. So who knows? I think saying it works well as a big three doesn't mean that it will win them a championship. I think there needs to be
Yeah.
there's a big difference between that. Is this a championship team? I just don't know. I don't trust big threes anymore. That's the funny thing because I look at it. I like the depth that they have, but it makes me wonder if they could have more. Like it does having Tobias Harris as that starter and adding more depth, is that really that much worse? Or hell, is that better? Is kind of the question that pops into my brain, right? So I don't know. It's kind of an odd spot to be in, I think.
Yeah. And I agree with the concern just around big threes, but I also just concern around availability, not just for George in the new signing, but also for Embiid. We saw this last season when Embiid has not been a paradigm of health during his time in Philadelphia, and that's been a big concern. That's been a big reason why they haven't been able to get over the top. I think, especially even in this most recent season, struggled with health down the stretch, and I think that's a reason they kind of petered off towards the end of the season. And Paul George has not been a paradigm of health or availability either. We brought up earlier the fact that he has not been on the court for he's only been on the court for around half the games in a season in his entire Clippers tenure. Those are not the numbers you want. And I think for this team to have success, both players have to be on the court like the majority of the season. And that's something that I put in extreme doubt going into it. And to even link it back to your point about big threes, what did we see with the Suns' big three, right? Where all of a sudden, like Beal gets injured or Booker gets injured, and you're just left with nothing. And I remember seeing a stat somewhere of like how little that big three actually played together. And you just hope it's not the same thing here. Because I think that really is the make it or break it kind of inflection point here. Is just availability.
Yep. And I agree with you there, I think we know what this if they are all on the court, it will work, right? But I think the biggest issue with big threes more than anything else is if one guy goes down, it kind of just falls apart. Because the entire point of bringing in three guys to kind of carry your team is that you will rely on the talent. So when you're in the second round and Paul George is hurt for whatever reason or Joel Embiid is hurt and it falls onto that next guy, there's a big difference between that next guy being someone you're paying $2 million to be able to afford Paul George, or when that next guy is someone you're paying like $15 million or something. Like that, there's a big difference there, I think. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a really, really important point to make. If they all stay healthy, this is a dangerous team in the East next year. But there is a big if. I think they are the team that, out of all the teams that we are going to be seeing chasing a championship next year, they are probably going to be one that is going to be more of a prove it type team. Like, show me what you can do, then I'll believe that you have it. But yeah, Philly hasn't necessarily had that playoff success yet, so they're obviously still chasing it. Is this the piece that gets them over the hump? We'll see.
We'll see. To kind of wrap up on this segment, we can move away from the Sixers, move away from Paul George's new team. If we want to talk a little bit about Paul George's old team in the Clippers, in terms of what him leaving the Clippers says about their organization, and how we've officially kind of reached the end of this Kawhi Paul George pairing era in LA, and it really produced nothing for them. Now, like, where do they go from here, and just how much of a failure was the last 4 or so years in LA? I feel like it's one of the, we talk about like star pairings blowing up in teams' faces. I feel like this Kawhi Paul George pairing has been one of the bigger implosions of the last 5 years, because we really got nothing out of them.
I'm just gonna cut to here. As context to everybody watching this, I definitely just had my mic muted for 3 minutes. Not enough to warrant redoing the podcast thing, so I'm gonna write a note to myself. This is behind the scenes. Just imagine that, like, you just had to listen to me blabber off about the fucking Clippers and how mediocre their roster is at this point. That's what I've been saying for the last 2 minutes. That's what you missed. You didn't miss much, so don't worry about it. Anyway, though, the main point I was trying to make. This is what I get for trying to eat crackers while podcasting. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
No.
Yeah.
Literally,
yeah. But yeah, as a whole, what we've seen them do in the last couple of years just hasn't worked. Whatever God has pissed at them is kind of just beating a dead horse at this point, because even as a fan of a rival team, it's kind of, at a certain point, it's just kind of brutal. Like, because they've gotten so close, it's not like they've sucked for like that long. They've had playoff teams, but they just don't
feel like
work.
they've always been on the fringe. Yeah, I feel like they've always been a second round exit team. You know what they feel like? They feel like the Capitals of the NBA before they won the cup.
Yeah.
Where it's like they've always had talent, but they just never were able to like get past the second round. Like,
Capitals,
you just saw it there. Capitals. This is like Capitals if the Capitals if they never won that cup. Like, I think this is how we would look at the Capitals if they had never won that cup.
I'm trying to think.
Obviously, you don't have like a
NHL
big star
team,
like Ovechkin.
There's not a comparable, honestly. Like,
it is a bit of a unique situation, just in terms of the changing out of talent. I think
you know what would be a better comparison.
That was another era that they had, and then like transitioning into this era with Kawhi, Paul George, all the other talent. I feel like they've just kind of had like recycle through this organization, just in terms of always being just like one step away, and having the talent to potentially make it work, but just never having it gel. Yeah, I do think, in terms of kind of beating a dead horse, like, I remember when the Kawhi signing happened for the Clippers, that was like, well, that was right after the Raptors won the championship, right?
Yep.
That was the biggest signing you could have ever made in the world, because the only reason the Raptors ever even sniffed that championship to begin with was because of Kawhi, and now the Clippers just got him. And it really did feel like inevitable that they would have at least some sort of sustained success. And just because of the health of Kawhi, because of the availability of Paul George, like, it just never happened. And now they're kind of having to sit in the wreckage of it. And it really is unfortunate for a team that has historically had little success to have such good players filter out of your organization without leaving any of an impact. It's really just terrible to see.
Yep. To end it off, I came up with a better NHL comparison, I think. Florida before they won the Cup. Because in a lot of ways, like, Florida was the team that just got beat up on for decades. If they didn't win that Cup, they're pretty much the same as the Clippers, at least in my own head. So that would be my comparable. Like, the last few years have been a lot better for Florida, but I think, take away this Cup win, a lot of people are still looking at them as the Florida Panthers of old.
Maybe. I think historically that lines up. I just think, I don't know if Florida ever had the expectations that the Clippers did. I think that's where the disconnect is for that, for me. Because I've never been like, up until like this year, I've never been like, oh yeah, Florida's got to win the Cup with the talent they have. Like, I feel like it's almost every year where I'm like, oh, the Clippers at least have to have a shot.
You're telling me that the core of Roberto Luongo, Yermir Yager, and like a 20-year-old Barkov didn't have you going, we got this. This is it.
No.
No?
No.
Dang.
No. I do think that speaks to how uniquely poor these last 10 years or so have been. And I mean, this just kind of puts the capper on that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Paul George does in Philadelphia. Maybe it can go from extending one fan base's turmoil to hopefully ending another. We'll see how it all goes. Clippers fans have got a rough couple years ahead of them. Hopefully 76ers fans can't say the same. Now, this is a segment that I am very excited to do. I don't know if you can tell, but I personally love the fact that there is trouble in San Francisco, and nothing makes me happier than seeing that Brandon Aiyuk. Nothing makes me happier than seeing that Brandon Aiyuk is continuing to have issues coming to terms with the Niners, and this has been an ongoing saga pretty much since they lost the Super Bowl, about whether he'd be coming back, whether he'd be signing a contract extension with them or not. We saw rumors about it with the draft, where they're drafting Ricky Pearsall, saying like, oh, is this their replacement for Aiyuk? I feel like there's something in the news about him complaining once every like week or so, with him being so active as he is on social media. But I think we haven't really talked about it yet to this point, but I think this is an interesting point to jump in on the conversation just because of what he said recently. He went on a podcast. He went on the Pivot podcast, and said he was asked which uniform he thought he'd be wearing next season. He said, if he were to take a guess, probably a Niners uniform. He said, if not a Niners uniform, probably a Washington Commanders uniform. If not a Washington Commanders uniform, probably a Steelers uniform. And yeah, like you can see on the screen here, if you're watching on YouTube, he also said, I feel like right now I'm in the right place, in the right spot, with the right quarterback right now, but we're not on the right terms. So it's been very clear throughout this entire negotiation that he's not willing to back down from the number that he thinks he's worth. And it's very clear that the Niners don't necessarily agree with what he thinks he's worth. Or even if they do, they don't have the cap space for it, with a bunch of huge contracts either already on their books in guys like Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, or with guys that will be coming due, number one being Brock Purdy in a year or two. So with that all being said...
Someday, there is a day at some point in the future where ESPN won't be able to use Purdy's amount of money as their go-to post on Instagram.
Wow, Purdy still sleeps in his dorm room. Purdy's basically a peasant.
Purdy still lives with his parents.
Isn't it crazy?
Purdy can't afford rent and lives off of like...
Isn't it crazy that he's only making $750,000 a year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the people at ESPN would be surprised how I survive on the amount of money I make.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. They
God, how would
paint him out to be like
how would anybody survive on that amount of money?
I know. But the way it's painted, it's like he is like scrounging for nickels outside Levi Stadium, and then by the time kickoff happens, he finds his way to the sideline and plays.
After each throw to the wide receiver, when they go to dap him up, he holds out like the tip thing, like 15, 18.
He's got like the jar, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, he'll get paid. He'll get paid eventually, no matter how much they want to milk that story.
Don't worry, guys. You won't have to live in a peasant house for too much longer.
No. Anyways, in terms of this Aiyuk news, I'll just kind of like leave it open. How much of it do you think is real, and how much of it do you think is just off-season smoke? Like, is he gonna be wearing a different uniform next year, or is this all just kind of like?
Truthfully, I have no clue. Like, it's so odd. This has been one of the years where, or this is one of the few examples where, honestly, like, I don't know whether he's, like, doing all this stuff in the media to throw us all off his trail or something, or if he's just, like, trying to, like, throw us all over the place. I don't got a damn clue. I think it would be really interesting. I think he goes back to the 49ers, if I were to give a prediction. I think it would be really funny if he left, like, to the Steelers or Commanders now after making that prediction. Like, I think it kind of, in a weird way, what he's doing right now kind of sets a new precedent for what players could do in the future.
Yeah.
A little surprised we haven't already seen it. Like, it feels weird that this is the first example of it, where a player's gone on a podcast and they've just been asked, where do you want to go? And he just goes, yeah, I like this team, I like this team, I like this team, I'd love to play with this guy. All that, right? Like, I'm surprised we don't see that more often, because at this point, with the access that players have, you're kind of like to the internet, I mean, like, and the ability to just put stuff out there, it's kind of surprising that we haven't seen it, especially in a league like the NFL, where they just have so many different personalities. Like, it's just, I don't know,
Yeah.
This feels like something that almost could have come sooner.
Yeah, and I agree. I think what he's doing, the way that I kind of described it in my head, is he's being a calculated diva. Like, he's being what we're seeing from him isn't necessarily anything new in terms of like whining out on social media to say, "Oh, I'm not getting paid enough money. Boo hoo! I want my money." Like, we've seen that from people before. Obviously, we see holdouts. We've seen players like. It's a lot of the big wide receivers. I mean, like, Antonio Brown is the one that comes to mind immediately, where it's just like they'll lash out, they'll say anything that comes to mind, but it doesn't necessarily feel like Aiyuk is doing the same thing. And I never necessarily thought of him as a diva before this, but it does feel like he's kind of using the personality more so as leverage.
Like, I actually don't think that anything that he's doing is like career ruining in any way.
No, not at all.
Because
that's why I said it's like a calculated diva.
It's almost like he's doing what a lot of people would probably do when they're just looking for a job. They'd be like, when they forgot a few options, they'd just be talking to a company and just go, listen, I've got this contract offer over here, not contract, this offer to come join them, right over here. They're paying me a little bit more. Why should I join you? He's almost doing that, but in the public. Because why not? Because why? You can. Like, it's the ability, like, when you're throwing it out into the world, all the Steelers fans out there just hold up. We could be getting Aiyuk. And are now going nuts. And now the Steelers GM is like, okay, now we kind of have to make this happen. When you're opening doors like this, it's the same thing that, like, half the insiders almost do in a weird way. Where I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of players, their way of doing exactly what Aiyuk is doing right now is leaking stuff to insiders. It's almost the same thing. You are your own insider. So in a lot of ways, I think it's very clever. Like, I think it's pretty smart. But, yeah, I don't know how everybody else feels about it, I guess. Are people thinking that he's kind of being a diva?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen some stuff. I don't have it all off the top of my head. I remember it being like, posting Instagram stories or something about him being like, nah, I ain't coming back or something. I don't know. Like, it's been a lot of stuff like that I would calculate as more being a diva, but I feel like as of recently, it is just kind of more leveraging than anything. And using,
Oh, shoot.
Like, yeah, I use social media. Here, yeah, I have this exact quote. So he posted a This is from that same article with the score. He posted a TikTok with Jaden Daniels talking about how the Niners don't want him back. And he then went on this podcast to explain. And he said, this is a direct quote, social media is a way for me and my team to leverage myself and what I'm trying to get, because that's the way for me to get the message out there and get the facts out there. And that's basically what we were saying. It is a very like diva-like behavior, but this is all intentional and this is all calculated. Whereas divas would, like Antonio Brown, would say similar things. It would be done in such a way that would be more damaging.
Yeah.
But
Antonio
really
Brown
is
doesn't have a team behind him clearly trying to, like...
No.
There's some things that he's doing that's very clearly, like, you know, a little... Like the TikTok, for example, is like, that wasn't necessary, right? Like, that's not necessarily something that needed to be out in the world. Like, it's not like you needed to go out there and say, they didn't want me no more, whilst doing whatever with, like, the team that does want you's quarterback. That might not have been necessary. But everything else that he's doing,
well,
I think is
it is all posturing, though, right? Like, I mean, that surely does put pressure if you're John Lynch to say, like, he's clearly going out and making it clear what he wants. Like, if we actually want him back, we're gonna have to get it done quickly, or else it's gonna get past the point of no return. I do think that it does put pressure on you if you're the GM, and I think if you're the player, that's always a good thing. In terms of, if we want to talk a little bit more about the teams he mentioned, I think both fits are kind of interesting in their own unique ways. I think Commanders, obviously, talking about doing TikToks with Jaden Daniels, you develop some rapport there. I think that him complimenting Terry McLaurin would just be a dream for a rookie quarterback to go into.
Yeah.
And then I think with the Steelers, you just immediately find your Deontay Johnson replacement. And pairing him with George Pickens is another one where it's just like Aiyuk has the talent to be a number one, but sliding him in as a complementary piece to a pre-existing number one just like makes his talent all that much better. And I think I don't remember which podcast I heard this on, but someone was making the point of how hard it is for free agents, and even though he wouldn't be necessarily if he got traded away, how it's often difficult for a player if you're the number two spot and you're a really good number two, and then you go to another team where they sign you to be the number one. It's so much of a different role that they often have a hard time adjusting, especially with the added pressure of having this huge contract. But having a player go from a number one to a number one, or from a number one to a number two, that transition often works out a lot better. And I think for Aiyuk, it would be the kind of thing where it's like a number one talent, but he doesn't, in both of those destinations, he doesn't necessarily have to be the number one. So I do like both of those spaces for him.
Yep, and I agree with all that. Like, it's the type of thing where, absolutely, as a rookie quarterback, you're bringing in a guy who's going to help out Jaden Daniels a ton. And I know there's been a lot of stuff coming out about a lot of hype for Daniels, actually, that we didn't necessarily see before the draft, with a lot of people very excited for what he could potentially do with the Commanders. You got to think that hype just goes up if they sign Aiyuk. Like, God, McLaurin and Aiyuk would be a fun wide receiver duo, absolutely. And I think the Commanders are already a team that they're not necessarily bad. Like, they've got a lot of good pieces, especially offensively now. They've got their quarterback, assumingly. Like, there's a lot of things to like, so I can see why he'd want to go there. Steelers are kind of a similar story. I don't know. Russell Wilson as the starting quarterback day one makes me question it a bit more, but it's the same type of thing where George Pickens and Aiyuk would also be a pretty fun duo. So as a whole, I like it a lot. I think either of those teams would be a lot better with Aiyuk. I still think the 49ers are the team that would probably make the most sense to stick around on, because they are the team that with Aiyuk would be the best. neither the Commanders nor the Steelers would be a better team than the 49ers with Aiyuk.
Yeah, and it's true, but I think with everything we've seen from Aiyuk, it's not necessarily about that. I don't think, not to say that he doesn't care about winning, because I think every player in the NFL cares about winning, but it's clear that making money is his priority here. And especially with some of those teams, like particularly the Commanders, I think it's very clear in his head that if he is to stay with the Niners, he would have to give a bit of a discount. And he even in this podcast, he talked about not being willing to accept a hometown discount, and that kind of makes that impasse really clear. I do think this has kind of been one of the more interesting points of this discussion, and maybe we can wrap up on this. Is so the Niners are like any team of this caliber have a cap crunch incoming, and they have 2-star wide receivers, and they probably aren't going to be able to keep both. I have heard some conversations in some of the football podcast channels that I listen to that essentially the Niners are viewing it as an Aiyuk or Debo situation. Yeah. Either you extend Aiyuk, or you extend Aiyuk and trade Debo before he gets to his next contract extension, or you keep Debo and keep rolling with what you've got and let Aiyuk go. If you're John Lynch, who do you prioritize? Where would you go with this?
Probably Aiyuk. Aiyuk's younger. That's the big thing, right? I think the two players are honestly not that far apart skill-wise. They're both good at different things, obviously, but it's not like you lose one and you're hurting a lot more. So I think the big decision maker for me ends up being age. Because off the top of my head, I'm guessing Aiyuk is at least 2 or 3 years younger. So at least to me,
Aiyuk is. I can tell you. Aiyuk is 2 years younger. Aiyuk is 26. Debo is 28.
And not that Debo's anywhere near the end of his career. He's probably still got another 2 or 3 good years out of him, but Aiyuk has 4 at least, right? And you also got to talk about play style. Aiyuk is nowhere near the run after catch wide receiver that Debo is. That's where Debo obviously makes his money. And I think once you get after 30, the style of wide receiver Aiyuk is kind of translates better in a lot of ways. So at least to me, I like Aiyuk a lot more as a guy that you want to bring in and be that franchise guy if you're really going to compare the two. But that's not necessarily a shot at Debo either. I think if it has to be one or the other, I think it has to be Aiyuk, and I think that's kind of a no-brainer, at least to me.
Yeah. I agree with you in terms of picking Aiyuk over Debo in this situation. Not necessarily for the same reasons. I think it is important to say, obviously age is a factor. Obviously Aiyuk is a lot younger. 28 years old as a receiver in the NFL, you still have quite a good time ahead of you. I do have some questions in terms of how he plays, how Debo plays. Maybe that's a little bit shorter, but you have to think if I'm not wrong, Debo was the same draft as DK.
Yeah.
And we still don't think I still don't think of DK as being an older receiver. Maybe I'm just getting old, but
that is a hilarious thought. I feel like DK is still a prospect.
I know. You still remember him coming into the league. He might. I don't actually know how old
26.
he is. It's same draft. I don't know if there's.
He's 26.
Okay.
So he's still younger.
Okay, so he's a lot younger coming into the league.
Yeah, he turns 27 every year. So there you go. But
okay. So there we go. But anyway, with Debo, you said you think he's got 2 good years left in him. I think it's probably is more than that. I think he's probably got a full contract. I could see if they sign up for a 4-year contract, I could see him playing up to that for the full 4 years. I think after that is when it starts to get a little bit sketchy, but I do think that he'd be able to play that out. I would still pick Aiyuk over Debo because I think some of the points you made later on were really good. And just in terms of play style, where I think you're right that Aiyuk's play style translates better as he gets older. And I also think this Niners team, once they got CMC, well, having Debo, because they use Debo a lot, obviously run after catch, but a lot of the stuff he did in the backfield was super valuable for them. And when they didn't have as good of a running game, he almost was their running game.
Yeah.
But with CMC, you don't need that anymore. And it's not to say you don't need Debo anymore, because I think he's still probably one of the most important parts of this team. But I do think that role that he was so good at isn't necessarily as important anymore. And the role that Aiyuk has, I think, can be a lot less easily replaced in terms of just being a pure go up and get it deep ball anywhere, and not just deep ball, anywhere in the field type wide receiver. And the last point I think that you didn't make that I would say is a point towards keeping Aiyuk over Debo. If you let Aiyuk go, it's most likely going to be just a letting him go in free agency. If you let Debo doesn't hit free agency until 2026, you're probably going to get something for him. It may not be the big of a return as we think it'll be, but it's still going to be something significant. So if I'm the Niners, the way I want to play this perfectly is extending Aiyuk, and then trading Debo, getting value out of it, to trying to develop Ricky Pearsall, and just keeping this train rolling as long as you can. Because that's what we saw with the Patriots, where it was just like they were so good at timing when to cut loose on their guys and getting stuff back for it, developing prospects with their picks, and just keeping the cycle. I think if you're the Niners, that's what you got to aim for. And I think you can a lot more easily do that by cutting loose on Debo instead of cutting loose on Aiyuk. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching and listening to the podcast. If you liked what you saw, make sure to definitely subscribe. Like we said at the start, we're almost at 100 subscribers, so make sure to hit that button if you liked what you saw. Otherwise, you can find us pretty much everywhere: TikTok, Instagram, all the good stuff. Anywhere you can find your audio podcast too: Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Trick Play Sports Podcast will be where you can find us there. Anyways, my shout out for the week. Well, I think we both were kind of struggling to come up with shout outs before. So I don't know if this is as much of a shout out as it is just a recounting of a moment, but I'm going to do an anti shout out this week, and it goes to myself. I was a little bit stupid this week. And I made a little bit of a fool of myself at my job, where I work in an office, for context, and so every so often I'll do the grueling physical activity of standing up to get a drink of water. Now, apparently my desk-dwelling ass has apparently degraded to the point where that's even too much to ask at this point. So I stand up to go get my glass of water, and everything's going great. I took a sip, it was fantastic, it's good shit. But as I'm walking back to my desk, they have these we have our walls, and then the walls kind of jut out into a big pillar. And my dumbass is just like looking somewhere else as I turn the corner, and I don't see the big pillar. So just like completely unprompted, I just run right into this pillar, and I spill my water all over myself. So just like standing there in the middle of the office, a very open concept office where everybody can see you. So I'm standing there like a fool, having walked into a wall and now completely drenched head to toe in water.
Because I've seen you on Be Real. Don't you have to like dress up for that as well? Like it's a pretty formal.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was completely like got my black dress shirt on.
You know what? At least it was a black dress shirt. that was my next question.
It had been, if it had been today where I wore my completely white outfit, that would not have been good. I would have been screwed. Yeah, I would have been completely fucked. But no, instead I just got slightly embarrassed by being trucked by a wall and having to waddle to the bathroom in shame. But that's my anti-shout-out. Is either for me or the wall, depending on how you view it. But I'm going to say I'm just stupid.
I've definitely done that before. I I don't really have a shout out for this week, so instead I will give my anti shout out. I haven't done this in a while. I haven't done this yet this year, but that reminded me of this. My version of that, because I will say, in situations like that where I am often around places that have that type of thing, where I can bonk my head on it if I'm not paying attention, I will often do so. It's not a choice I have. It'll just happen.
Yeah.
And at my house, we live on a little bit of a hill. And our shed, so our shed is like your average shed. Picture a shed in your head with like triangle roof, like the whole thing. But it has like the roof hanging off the side, and because it's on a hill, whenever I've gone to mow the grass, I will almost every time, without fail, hit my head on that corner. It is, I don't even know how to explain it. I haven't done it yet this year, and I'm proud of myself because that is an accomplishment. Last summer, I don't know how many times I probably did it. But every time when I'm going to that section, I'm like, I'm going to remember this time. I have to duck. When I'm getting to that part, because the way, like, I can personally say that I've mowed my lawn enough times that I do it the same way every time. You know what I mean? Like, you kind of got you've got your whole, like, formula.
You have a routine.
You have a routine.
Yeah.
The way that I go at it, that one corner, is always in a way that it's like a blind spot. And I don't know why I do that to myself. But at this point, I should have an indent in my skull at some point. It hasn't happened yet this summer. I don't know how. We have gotten to July, and it's still not gotten there yet. You know what? Actually, I do have a real shout out. I'll throw this out there last second, because as an update from my last week shout out with the hat, because I did fucking everything to try and fix that hat. And I tried ironing it. I tried putting it under. I tried literally. I put it underwater. You're laughing, but I did try ironing it. I ended up crisping the brim of the hat a little bit.
That's so funny.
I tried soaking it in water and then putting it under weights, 20-pound weights, and it was still bent after all that. And then I finally gave up. And I saw my mom and just went, you know what? I just literally went if you have any ideas as a human being who has lived much longer than me on how to make this hat work, and I beg you, go nuts on it. She took it for 5 minutes, came back with it perfectly fixed. And she said she just used an iron. So shout out to my mom for being somehow I don't know how she did it. I do not understand. She said she used the steam filter or thing on our iron, which I know you can do. I didn't bother doing that. I didn't think it would matter, but there we go. Shout out. A little bit late, not quite. It's when was Mother's Day? It was a good while ago.
A while ago. Yeah, it's a little bit.
It's been a good while ago, but there you go. Shout out to my mom. There you go.
I laughed at ironing it, but that's what fixed it.
It is. I know. That was the funny thing. Ironing it seemed like the thing that would work. I think the difference
I guess it makes sense.
If I had wet it before I ironed it, it might have. I think that's probably what she did, because that makes no sense to me. But now I don't have to wear a crooked ass a cowboy hat to Stampede, which is absolutely sick.
Your money has been saved. You have your hat back. Yeah, at least. Maybe not fully in spirit, but
not fully in spirit. That's true.
To the greatest extent you can.
There is some shark in the Atlantic who is enjoying the shit out of my hat, and someday I'll track him down. He knows who he is. Someday, that will be my life goal.
Trick play 211. Simon wrestles a shark.
No. I will, because that's too easy. I'm gonna bring the shark on the podcast. It'll be like a guest episode.
I'm mentally humiliated.
I am going to berate that shark for stealing my hat. It's gonna be sick. It's gonna be a great episode. We bring on the shark to talk about the sharks. At this point, Macklin Celebrini will be in season 15. It'll be great. It's gonna take me a long time to track down the shark. I think only 4% of the earth or the ocean has been explored or whatever. That 96% is going to get explored in my attempt to find this fucking shark.
Yes. There you go.
That is my promise.
That's why you That's why you subscribe to the podcast, is for a
Exactly.
shark episode in
Exactly.
15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
But
That
anyways,
yeah. Anyways, subscribe, but also
that-
anyways.
but subscribe for the shark episode.
Yes.
That's the only reason.
That's the only reason.
Yeah. But thank you all for watching this episode of the podcast. And before you leave, young children, gather around. I have a story to tell you. It's a short story, but a lovely story. This story will grow your character. This story will nurture your soul. It stirs up that warm, fuzzy feeling inside of you that all of us once had, and you might have thought you lost, but you didn't. Because trust me, child, hearing these few words will bring that spark of joy that you thought you lost back into your heart. And those words are, remember, kids, Penix better have a warm ass. See you next week.